Hi everybody, welcome back to your update. Just wanted to touch base on a few things, few developments, and what's happening around the peace process. So, what's the background? We had a 28-point plan suggested by the United States to the Ukrainians. That has now been whittled down, we're told, after meetings in Geneva between Marco Rubio and the Mr. Yermak, this exquisitely dubious character who was sent by Zelensky to head Ukrainian, negotiations. Remarkable stuff. We'll talk about that in a second. It's been whittled down, we believe, now to 19 points. Okay, so 19 points from 28. We don't know what happened to the other points, what the compression is, and it's very important now to say this: we're speaking in a vacuum. We haven't had a real Russian response to any of this, other than sort of narrating it from the sidelines. We had Mr. Ushakov saying, "Look, we're watching it. There's going to need to be changes." The Kremlin has said, we're aware of parts of it now, but we know today in the UAE, as we speak, talks are going on between Russia and the US. So the US is playing kind of shuttle diplomacy, meeting the Ukrainians in Geneva, and now in the UAE meeting the Russians before anybody's going to sit down together. That's going to be the case. Now, what's important to note and to realize is that the Russian position has not changed. It hasn't changed since February 2022. It isn't going to change. The Russians are advancing. I know the Western media and commentators like these delusionists like Ben Hodges and these failed NATO generals and the client media in the West think Russia's winning too slowly. Okay, Ukraine is losing too slowly. Ukraine is in a perpetual debt spiral. It's a debt of a thousand cuts. So the reality is that the Russians are willing and capable to prosecute this war for another 4 years if it has to do. Ukraine isn't in that position economically, manpower wise, militarily, and support wise from Europe. People in Europe are absolutely sick of this war. The average European is done with it. There's no Ukrainian flags flying anymore. The Ukrainian refugee crisis is just that, it's a crisis. People are done with this war. Now, the European elites aren't, because they've invested so much political capital, financial capital into Ukraine, along with their side deals. Ursula von der Leyen and her Pfizer deal with her husband. We know how these people operate. There's a profit to be made here. Massive profits for Zelensky's corrupt elite. But where are we with the actual peace deal? Will there be a deal? I think you're looking at weeks before anything really concrete is hammered out here, for several reasons. A lot of these things have to be discussed at certain levels in the Russian government, the Americans. We saw before with Alaska an initial flush of hope that something could happen. And then we go into a trough on this remarkable sort of roller coaster. So don't think that there's going to be a rapid breakthrough. I don't think there is going to be a rapid breakthrough. The Russians are going to keep fighting, keep advancing. Speaking about the sort of hapless Ben Hodges, this absolutely deluded American ex-NATO commander, saying today on Irish radio, I was listening to it, that Pokrovsk is strategically unimportant. I mean, it was a matter of time before this copium was released, and Hodges was probably first out of the traps. Apparently, Pokrovsk is unimportant. Kupiansk is now going to be unimportant. The swathe of territory that the Russians are occupying slowly, as Vladimir Putin accepted, is all unimportant, it seems to me. But it seems to be the very, very sticking point for the Ukrainian side. It might all be unimportant, then why are the Ukrainians so desperate to cling to it all? Why have they built a vast defense belt, which Russia is breaching at the moment? And after that, it's open fields essentially all the way to the Dnieper River. So let's base what we're talking about in reality. When Russia wins, it's losing. Russia was losing. Now, Trump has handed them a win. It's just absolute delusionism. Look at the maps. Look what's happening. Look at the fake news about the Russian economy. Listen to intelligent people like Niall Ferguson saying the Russian economy isn't doomed. It's hurting. Of course it is. No country benefits from long wars. It's just an economic reality. But what Russia has done is masterful in the management of this conflict, particularly economically. Oil exports are still happening. Of course, The Russians don't want this war. They didn't want the war in the first place. So the idea that anyone's reveling in this in Russia is ridiculous. The Russians want this war over, but they know that no deal is better than a bad deal. Remember that. And the Russians, once bitten, twice shy. They've done this stuff before. Ukraine had a much better deal in the Minsk Accords. The European powers that were meant to guarantee that admitted that they had used it to build up an army, that it was a ruse, basically. They admitted that. We've seen again and again the Russians, you know, putting a bit of faith in the sort of Western diplomatic process. The room for that now is increasingly small. The window for this to end is very small. We had Dmitry Peskov 2 days ago saying, "Look, if the Ukrainians don't do a deal this time, it's very unlikely that the Russians will come back to the table. They'll go back to the table saying, look, now we're at the Dnieper. I mean, maybe that's the next step. Maybe Odessa. Who knows? If Europe is really interested in peace, they need to sit down and do a deal now on the basis of pragmatism, realpolitik. The Russians are advancing. They do control the vast majority of the Donbass region already. And there's two options. You either sit and do a deal now, or the Russians will dictate the terms later on. The people of Europe are done with this. We don't want to spend any more money on this insane losing bet in Ukraine. It was a failure. It is a failure. The whole idea of destabilizing Russia and delivering a strategic defeat of the Kremlin has completely boomeranged back and hit the EU in the teeth. Now, Donald Trump has recognized this and he said, we're done. We're done funding it. You want to buy weapons? We'll sell you the weapons. But another thing that's very interesting that Mr. Trump's press secretary said last night was that, we can't continue to give you guys weapons to funnel to this dictatorship for forever. It's going to have to end at some stage. Trump wants it over. He wants it on the shelf behind him. He wants the award. I fixed Ukraine. And that's a motivation which is unique to Donald Trump. For good or for bad, good peace. We all want peace. I think that's the reality. But the big stick and point now, the stone in the shoe for the process is going to be the Europeans with this utterly ridiculous suggestion that is countering every Russian tenet of what they said. The Russians, what they said on the 24th of February 2022 is exactly what they're saying now. There's no difference. And those goals will have to be achieved either at the table or on the battlefield. They're achieving them on the battlefield slower than they'd like. And remember, people said, Russia couldn't achieve its goals. It can't do this now. Russia's facing an alliance of over 50 countries economically, militarily. Ukraine had the biggest land army in Europe when the Russians crossed the border. Think about that. This isn't an easy fix for anybody, particularly not the Russians. Think about the reality of that army being built up, 10,000 men a year by NATO in order to suck Russia into this conflict. This is, absolute, these are accepted realities from any objective observer. And you're not being told any of this by any objective observer in the absolutely crooked and compromised Western media. It's absolutely remarkable. It puts your blood pressure up to even listen to them, which I try not to do other than to critique them. So that's where we are right now. Hopefully, we're going to see something. The idea that it's going to be fast, forget it. It's not going to be fast. Remember, this is a 1,000-kilometer plus long front line on which Russia is advancing on 90% of it, basically. Even the British Ministry of Defence accepts that now. So how does it get better for Ukraine if they fight on? Somebody explain how. Hoping that Russia will suddenly sort of say, oh, look, sorry, and reverse back across the border. It's not going to happen. Russia hasn't activated its war economy to the point where it could do. It hasn't done a general mobilization. If it did, 3 million men could pour over the borders into Ukraine. So let's be realistic. They haven't even declared war. And remember, this huge flurry of activity in Europe and in Kiev, it conveniently comes at the same time when a massive corruption scandal is breaching the surface in this exquisitely corrupt country. Yermak, at the head of a crime syndicate, essentially. And of course, in the center is Mr. Zelensky, who is a completely innocent man. He knew nothing about the corruption. Check out the OCCRP's investigation into Zelensky, the Pandora Papers. Check it out. Long before the Russians came across the border, this was a grossly corrupt little man. Check it out, and I'll talk to you soon.